All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Friday to everyone, or happy Thursday, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. My name is Rowan Smith. I'm the founder of Summit Strength, and today we are answering your questions around training for hiking. Now, anyone who's watching this live, feel free to post up any comments, any questions you may have in the comments, and I will try my best to answer them. And I also have a few different questions that have been sent through already, which I'll be covering. Now, today is going to be relatively short and sweet. Usually I try to go for about 45, 60 minutes with these. Today, probably about 30 minutes or so. I've just got a very, very sick wife in the other room who I want to go make sure she's all right and look after. So it's going to be relatively short and sweet today. Now, as I sort of said, if anyone does have any questions watching live, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. Beyond that, I do have a sort of few questions that have sort of come up over the last few days, which I will going to cover in a little bit of detail for people to watch the recordings. So with that being said, while we're waiting for any live questions coming through, let's get into the pre-prepared ones. Now, first of all, we are talking about closed eye balance. Now, closed eye balance is essentially something that I think is a relatively important subject for quite a few hikers, and it's something we're going to talk about. So, essentially, the question for closed eye balance and where this is coming from is someone asked me the other day, why do so many hiking coaches out there talk about closed eye balance? And that was literally the question I got. And the context for this, when it comes down to it, when we are looking at training and physical preparation for hiking, there are numerous different qualities of fitness that we want to consider and develop if we really want to get best place for the trail. Now, first and foremost, we want to develop aerobic fitness, our ability to go and go and go and go. We do need some elements of higher intensity fitness to help us deal with sort of harder sections of the trail. We want to develop muscular strength, we want to develop muscular endurance, mobility, and also balance. Like all of these different aspects of fitness are pretty important in their own way. Now, when we are looking at working with a hiker, and when we do first start working with a hiker through Summit Strength and through what I do all day, every day, is I typically, before we even start programming, start training, I'll get everyone to go through a series of different assessments just to get a bit of an insight to where they're at and help us identify any strengths and weaknesses, blind spots they may have. Now, this isn't the typical fitness assessments where we might ask you to do the beep test or just run you into the ground or anything like that. I know a lot of trainers do that, but this is really just some sort of simple assessments you do at home. It takes about 20 minutes for us to get a bit of insight to where you're at. One of the assessments that I do and where this question is coming from, and I know a lot of other hiking coaches out there use it as well, is the single leg balance assessment, which is really, 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 really simple. And essentially all we get you to do is basically stand on one leg. You stand on one leg in the air. And essentially all you do is you close your eyes and you hold that for as long as you can. For some people, they can do this pretty happily and they can do this for 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 60 seconds. It's not that big a deal. For some people, they may only be able to last 2 or 3 or 5 seconds or whatever it may be before they're wobbling all over the place and actually fall over. Well, not fall over, but have to put a foot down. And this is an assessment we use. We get people to count how long they're going to do it and they go ahead. And then for some people, if they're like, hey, I just can't do this closed eye stuff, then we'll get them to do the same thing, but with their eyes open, which makes it significantly easier as we go through. But going back to the question, why do so many hiking coaches out there talk about closed eye balance? Well, when it comes down to it, closed eye balance is a pretty relevant area of fitness for hikers. Because we all kind of know balance is important for the trail. We know rougher terrain, we've got to be balanced. We know slippery terrain, we've got to be balanced. We know carrying a pack on our back can throw us out a little bit and pull us in different directions. We want to be balanced there. And we know we don't want to fall over and trip over on the trail because worst things are the best case scenario, we just get a little bit muddy and get a little bit embarrassed. Worst case scenario, we do this and we're like, oh my gosh, like I've actually broken an arm or snap my collarbone or something like that. And that may sound a bit dramatic, but it does happen and it definitely happens for a lot of people. So essentially, balance in itself is important for the trail, and most hikers are pretty aware of this. Now, the closed eye balance and why we use this as a fitness assessment is essentially when we're closing our eyes and we're trying to balance in this situation, it essentially just takes away our visual input. Now, when we are trying to balance, when we're trying to stabilize, we use a lot of vision to help with it. We use looking where we're at, how we're moving, and our visual input is really, really, really important for balance. And it's something which our brain uses a lot for balance. What happens if we do this closed eye balance? We take that vision away from it. It actually forces our body to rely on other sensory systems, which isn't our vision, but actually other sensory systems, just to know where it is in space, which is kind of half of what balance is, how we're actually correcting and compensating, and how we're stabilizing and balancing. Now, where the relevance for hiking comes in is when we are hiking, yeah, we're never hiking with our eyes closed, and we are always hiking with our eyes open. However, there are many, many situations when you're actually out on the trail, where you may not be looking where you're going. We may not be looking, directly where we're stepping our feet. We may not be looking directly where we're going. We may be looking up and actually taking in the view, which is half the fun of hiking. We may be with a friend. We're just chatting away with a friend or whatever it may be, and we don't actually know where our feet are going. Sometimes we may be looking at the trail, but we're not directly looking at our feet, and there's an unexpected shift under your feet. Maybe we step on a loose rock and all of a sudden it shifts. Maybe we step in a pothole and that nasty feeling when you're walking along, it's relatively even, and then all of a sudden you just go a bit deeper with your step than you normally do. It's not much fun. There may be mud or swiftly terrain where you step on it and it slides out, or whatever it may be. There's a lot of situations where we're not directly seeing what's going on, but the body does have to compensate. And in any of these situations, having the ability of your body to recognize where it is in space quickly without actually having to look down and know what's going on, because it's very, very, very quick, and react quickly is very valuable. So that's essentially why we test and train closed eye balance in different situations, particularly for people who are aware that, like, hey, they're a little bit unsteady on the trail, they're a little bit nervous about rougher terrain, whatever it may be. This is a good priority. Now, if we got really, 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 really technical, it probably isn't exactly the same as in having closed eye balance and developing that and actually having our eyes open but having something shift out. If we were sort of trying to do scientific studies or something, it's probably not exactly the same. But it's close enough for our respects. And in the context of our respects, it's still going to be beneficial. Now, a few sort of final notes on this one, just to sort of talk through things is a lot of people, when they go down the route of balance training, and I find myself talking about this every couple of weeks, is a lot of people will do balance stuff, but they get really, really complicated. And they'll end up doing all these exercises and they think about closed eye balance. Maybe they think, oh, I'm going to do all my training with blindfold on, or I'm going to do heavy strength training with my eyes closed, or whatever it may be. But in all honesty, this balance training does not have to be difficult, and closed eye balance does not have to be difficult. Typically, the way that we sort of approach it through Summer Strength and the way I approach it is we'll kind of have a combination. If someone's directly trying to improve this, we'll have a combination of two things. We'll do some specific balance drills and a few integrated balance drills. So what I mean by this is specific balance drills are just little simple things you can do in your workouts and in your week, which can directly train balance. Now, as you said before, a lot of people, when we test this closed eye balance, they may stand on one leg, close their eyes, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I can only do like 2 or 3 seconds. And that can be a little bit tricky. So sometimes we'll start people by doing a staggered stance and closed eye balance, which, let's see if I can find it in good old YouTube and actually show you a picture of this. Stance balance. Where basically we're just sort of standing. Here it is. This is the video I use for my clients. Really, really simple. Basically what we're doing is, instead of being on one leg, we've got 1 foot forward, 1 foot back. And we're literally just holding this position and with our eyes closed. Now, this is a really, really good starting point for this closed eye stuff, because already you'll notice you do that and you're kind of swaying all over the place. It takes a little bit of getting used to, or whatever it may be. Now, we may do this for a few weeks, and once we kind of get comfortable, then we'll progress to the single leg stuff. So where am I? So you may literally just do this, where you're basically on one leg on the floor, close our eyes, and we'll hold that for as long as we can. And literally we'll just sort of hang out there and just hold that for as long as we can. And then we may progress this to doing the same thing, but you're standing on like a mat or a pillow. So you may do this same thing, and if you're doing it at home, you may just get a pillow and put it under your feet, and you'll notice that all of a sudden you're wobbling all over the place and it gets significantly more difficult. Or you could get like a yoga mat or an exercise mat, just fold it up and do it there. And if you really, really, really want to make things a little bit more difficult, you could do it off like a stability disc or a Bosu ball or something like that, which is really, really unstable. Most people, we don't really get to that point, like it's not particularly necessary, but that is something we do with a few people. So before I go any further, let me just sort of share this in the chat so you kind of get a visual of what we're doing here. Cool. So that's the closed eye stuff, and that's all pretty straightforward. Now, the next stuff we may sort of look at is, okay, those are our specific balance drills. We typically will sort of put them into our workouts and usually do it as part of our strength workouts, either as part of our warm-ups where we're just still warming up and throwing in a couple of things, or also we may do these in our rest periods in strength workouts, which works out pretty well as well. Now, the next up if we're looking at this integrated balance, this is essentially where we sort of look at certain exercises where we can reduce the visual component a little bit, but still work through um, a particular movement. So a typical example of this is doing, I think I shared this the other week, but it can be a good one, is doing a pack loaded with a front forward lunge. Now, the idea behind this, in this situation, the eyes are open. We're not doing this with our eyes closed because it would be impossible with your eyes closed. But what we are kind of doing here in this integrated situation is what's happening is we're doing a forward lunge or we're stepping forward. It can be pretty good. But what we're tending to be doing here is if we've got our pack at the front, it actually gets in the way of our visual line. We can't actually see where we're stepping our feet, which in this video, it kind of looks relatively simple. But I had to do this a bunch to actually stop myself falling over. And this is a type of integrated thing where we can just get the visual component out of the way and go with that. Again, it's not going to be 100% the same as doing with eyes closed, but this is going to be a little bit closer to what we're doing on the trail and can be pretty effective. So anyone want to check that one out, I'm just going to pop them in both of the chats as well on Facebook and YouTube, and you can check that out as well. And yeah, I mean, you may just throw in a few bits and pieces like that. You don't have to do all your strength training like that, but just a few bits and pieces. Now, last thing I'll sort of say on this before I kind of wrap this one up is closed dive balance. It is important, it is valuable, but it is probably the slowest and most frustrating aspect of fitness to improve. So if you do it for a week or two and you're like, oh my gosh, this is getting nowhere, it's totally normal. Essentially for this, we just want to do little bits and pieces as much as you can. Do it when you're brushing your teeth, do it when you're waiting for the kettle, do it here and there. And the more you can just sort of add that into your week, a long way it can go. So that's enough on the closed dive balance. Important aspect of fitness. I think it works for very, very relevant for a lot of people. So with that being said, I've got a couple of other questions I'm going to cover, but anyone who is watching live and wants to check things out or any questions, feel free to pop in chat and we can cover it as we go. So next question I'm going to be covering is sore hips on overnight hikes. So this is a question I got sent through just the other day. And basically they sort of said, look, after walking a day or two on multi-day trips, I tend to get really, really sore lateral hips, so around the side of my hips. This is never really a problem in day-to-day life. I'm wondering what's going on here. You know, maybe it might be weak muscles, maybe tight ligaments and tendons, maybe a pressure on the hip belt or on the pack, like what's sort of going on here. And I would sort of say this is a very, very, very common thing that a lot of people get. There are a few different things that can kind of go into it, depending on the situation, depending on where the actual soreness is. But I'll talk you through a few bits and pieces. So essentially what I typically recommend in this type of situation, you want to look at three things: gear, technique, and physical preparation and training. Now, gear, first and foremost, two things we want to look at. Number one, pack fit your hip belt. You know, making sure your pack is fitting nicely goes a long way. Making sure that your hip belt is sitting in the right spot goes a long way. And just making sure that you've readjusted straps, like it hasn't been months and months and months since you've readjusted things, go into that. If you're not 100% sure about how to go about this and make sure you are, everything is packed right, then maybe go down to your local gear store, bring in your pack and see if someone will help you out. Or, go onto YouTube, there's a million and one pack fitting tutorials there. With the hip belt, if you are aware that, okay, it's actually like it's soreness because the hip belt's really, really pushing in. I have had people who sort of put extra padding on that area. So I've had some people in the past who have got like a sock and they cut off the end of the sock and they strap that around the hip belt. So there's a little extra padding. I've had people who have really, really bony hips who really struggle with this, who've actually got like pool noodles and done the same thing. There's a few different things you can do. You can kind of explore that. The other thing you can kind of explore is sleep systems. This may not be relevant, but it does happen to some people. I know it happens to me. Is if your sleep system isn't amazing, sometimes if we're side sleepers, we're sleeping on the side, and our actual sleeping pad isn't amazing, sometimes that can just end up being a little bit bruised. If you get cold during the night or whatever it may be, or if you're just lying on that side all night, it can get a little bit bruised. That can lead to a bit of soreness. I know I struggle with that a little bit. So if you're aware that that may be you, then maybe looking into an alternative for your sleeping. But beyond that, let's talk a little bit about other things, because that's, gear stuff you can dig into, whatever it may be. Now, on technique, one thing that I would sort of recommend is if you're aware that, hey, um, if this isn't so much of a problem in day-to-day life, and maybe I do day hikes, and it doesn't bother me so much, but it tends to be when I'm walking a day or two on multi-day trips, I start to get it. One thing that you can do, or one of the main issues with this is sometimes it does creep up just because the body is just getting stressed out. And you do day hikes, you do normal training, and then you're doing a big jump up to a multi-day or an overnight hike, and those hips are just doing way more work than they used to. Pretty normal. And we can build up to that in our training, but there's always going to be a step up from a day hike to an overnight. We're not going to do overnighters or multi-days all the time. So one thing you can do just to kind of give the hips a little bit nicer chance of staying comfortable is just adjusting your walking speed. If you're aware that this is a pretty regular thing, then just reducing your speed down a little bit, specifically on the flat periods of hiking, can just take a little bit of pressure away from this area. And just intentionally think, okay, uphills, my speed will be regulated. Downhills, my speed will be regulated. On the flats, I'm just going to make sure that I'm not power marching away. I'm just going to go a little bit shorter than I usually would do. This is one of the most simple things that any hiker can do. Just take pressure off areas, and it can go a long way. So that's that. Next up, let's have a talk about training and physical preparation. Because if you're in the situation where the hips are getting tight, and say your pack's fitting well, your hip belt's good, your sleep systems are good, you're walking at normal speed, then we do want to consider, okay, what can we do for training and physical preparation here? If you're getting sore in the lateral hips, that tends to be the glutes, like the bum muscles in one way or another. And yeah, it just may be a case of the glutes just not being quite prepared as well as they could be. Now, if you come down, into the glutes, there's a few different muscles that's going on. Essentially, you've got a glute maximus, which is a big muscle in the glutes. We got a glute medius, which is a small muscle, a little bit deeper in the glutes, and then we got glute minimus, which is hiding in there, and the piriformis, which is hiding in there as well. So realistically, for training, we kind of want to think about, okay, typically these two areas here are sort of things we want to train. So glute medius work, this is that small muscle in the glute. This is something that often gets neglected for a lot of people with training, but it can be very, very worthwhile if you're getting that lateral soreness in your hips. Definitely worthwhile training. In all honesty, I get all of my hikers training this because it's very, very useful. And it goes a long way. Because this particular muscle, even though it's small, it does play a big role in regards to hip and knee stability. So while we're hiking, going up and down hills, this does play a pretty big role in regards to making sure the knee doesn't fall in, making sure the hip stays nice and stable. And over time, it does a lot of work. Now, if we're on the trail and we're hiking, and this isn't strong enough, this hasn't been trained enough, and it gets fatigued, which will happen, this can lead to a little bit of soreness. So we can kind of think about, okay, what can we do to help build this up? There's a million and one ways to go about this, but a few simple exercises can help. Number one, mini band walks. Really, really, really simple. Basically, something like this, where you kind of got a band and you're just going back and forth, back and forth. You're building up a bit of tension in that and doing little things like this. Very, 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 very simple. Other options, you may look at doing something like, so see, I should have pulled this up earlier. Star. No, I got this. Other options, you may do something a little bit more complicated, like a glute star exercise, where basically we're doing similar thing, working the same muscle, but what we're doing is, yeah, we've got it linked here, and we're just going through a few different ranges of motion, a few different angles, and this can be quite good for working the glute medius as well. And then another option is pretty much any type of single-legged strength work tends to work out pretty well. So doing things like step downs or split squats or lunges, as much as those things aren't so isolating that area, it is doing a reasonable amount of work there. So that could be a good place to start on glute medius. So what I'm going to sort of say is I'm going to pop these in the chat so people can check these out if you're watching this in the future and have a little look. Now, for the mini band walks, I typically use these as a nice place you can add these in like the warm-ups of your particular workouts. If you're just warming up, you can just do a set of two of these, works out pretty well. Now, next up, we talked about glute medius work. Next up, we will talk about glute max work. So as I said, the glute max is the bigger muscle in the glutes, is very, very important here as well. Exercises which can help with this type of thing, doing something like a glute bridge, where you basically, lying down, maybe band around the knees and just pushing the hips up to the sky, squeezing the glutes as we go through. Very, very basic, but very, very, very simple. That can go a long way. Another exercise we may do like a hip thrust, which is a very similar movement, but what we're doing is we're just increasing the range of motion by putting our our like shoulders off a bench. So essentially exactly the same thing, but we're kind of pushing up our hips a little bit higher. This can be pretty good. And then another option is doing something like a single-legged deadlift, where basically we're on one leg and we're tipping over and then coming up. Now, this particular exercise will work the hamstrings a little bit more than those other two variations, but does do a reasonable amount of glute work. On top of that, as we sort of said before, anything single leg is probably going to get that glute medius working a little bit as well. So working a glute, if we're looking at glute max work, some of those exercises can be good. Now, if you followed any of my stuff before, you will be very, very, very familiar with a lot of these exercises that I'm showing. Because in all honesty, a lot of this stuff is just in my normal standard training programs for hikers. Because all of this stuff is really, really, really good bang for your buck exercises. All of this stuff is really, really just covers a lot of bases for hikers. And anyone, even if you don't struggle with these lateral hips, probably going to get some good benefits out of this type of stuff. So we sort of look at that. And then finally, the last thing we sort of look at is some specific endurance training. So this stuff, strengthening, always beneficial. Building up your strength, building up your muscular endurance, always, always, always beneficial. But in all honesty, this stuff is always going to be classified as general training in the sense that what we're doing in the gym is very, very useful, but there is a little bit of a gap between that and what we actually need to be ready for the trail. So essentially what we want to do here is we want to fill that gap with some specific endurance training. So essentially what that means is regularly exposing the body to the demands of the trail in your training. This can go a long, long, long way. So a specific example of this may be doing some stair and hill climbing. So as we sort of said, as you're hiking, as you're going along, stepping, when you're going up and down hills, that glute medius, that glute max is doing quite a bit of work to stabilize the hips, stabilize the knees, doing a lot of work there. If we, in the gym, we may train this for 5 repetitions or 10 repetitions or 15, 20 repetitions or 20 repetitions, which gets it ready for 90 seconds or 120 seconds worth of work. But we want to expose the body to this in really, really extended periods because on the trail, we're going to be going up and down these big hills. We want to get relatively similar. So stair and hill climbing goes a long way for this type of thing, where we can basically find a nice set of stairs, a nice long hill, and just doing some repeats of that. So basically, you may start off with body weight, do that for a little while, build up time. So each week you may add like 4 minutes or 5 minutes of climbing, and then add in packed weight over time, with the intention of just bit by bit exposing the body to those extended periods. And this repeated stress of just going the hips are just getting stressed in a way where we're progressively making harder can be pretty good in regards to bridging that gap between general strength workouts and the specific demands of hiking. So going back to the original question, solid lateral hips, make sure your gear's all in line with your pack and your sleep systems. Maybe pull back your hiking speed, and in your training, making sure you're covering your glute medius work, which could be any of those exercises. Your glute max work could be any of those exercises, and also some type of specific endurance training. I would hazard a guess that if you could string that all together and do it in a way that does progress over time and stay consistent with it, that will probably go a long, long way. So that is that on that topic. So as I've got one more question I wanted to cover today before I'm going to duck off. I will also say anyone who is watching this live who wants to check this out, feel free to pop in the chat. Happy to help. But with that being said, let's talk about the one more question. And this is a question that came up just the other day in the training for hiking community, school community. This particular question, I did answer it in that group, but I felt it was worthwhile going over in a bit of video and talking through this because it's very, very relevant for a lot of people. And we're talking about the last hike before an adventure. And essentially the question here is, what is the theory and the science behind not hiking the weekend before a big trek? What is the theory there, and why am I going about this, and why do you recommend it? Because when it comes down to building up to a big adventure, whether a big adventure is a big day hike, an overnighter, multi-day out, whatever it may be, many hikers, the first thought for a lot of people, they're like, okay, I'm building up my training hikes week by week, we're getting a little bit harder, a little bit of this and whatever it may be. They kind of think, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do my hiking all the way up to before I leave. And I have a particular date, I'm just going to hike until I absolutely leave. And this makes a lot of sense for a lot of people because the first thought of the process is like, hey, I just want to fit in as much as I can before I go, which makes sense. That is not something that I recommend. Typically, what I recommend is when I'm talking about training hikes and putting together a plan, is I recommend that hiker plans to have their longest and their toughest hike, usually about 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks before their big adventure. And after that, you're either not hiking anymore or you're just doing really short and easy hikes. About 2 weeks before you go, that's kind of your last final training hike. And then the weekend before you go, it's all pretty chill. So going back to the question, what's the deal with this? Why do I recommend this? And why don't I say just hike all the way up to the end? When it comes down to it, there's a few reasons why I particularly recommend this. Number one, training adaptations. When it comes down to any training, whether it's your hiking, whether it's your strength training, whether it's your cardio, anything like that, essentially the body doesn't get fitter, stronger, or more resilient when you actually train. It's not like you do a session and immediately after your body has improved and adapted. There is a little bit of delay between your training sessions and the actual adaptations we're looking for. Essentially, your body will get more fit, more strong, and more resilient once you recover from training. This recovery does not happen immediately. This recovery does not happen overnight. This recovery just will peter into effect over the next few days, over the week, or whatever it may be. Now, the idea behind this is as you're going through your training, as you're training week after week after week after week, and you're finishing off your hard training before you go away in your last hard hiking, we want to make sure that the body has time to properly recover, to consolidate all the hard work you've been doing, to create those adaptations before you go. Because if you just do your last full hard training hike just before you go, it's probably not going to be enough time for your body to actually properly recover from that and really suck the best adaptations from it. So number one, we just want to make sure there is enough time for the body to recover, to adapt, to grow stronger, to grow fitter, to grow more resilient. So when you enter your hike, you are in your peak fitness. So that's number one. Number two is a buffer. Now, typically the last hike you are doing before a trip tends to be the most difficult one you'll do before. It tends to be the longest, the heaviest pack weight. That's kind of what we want to do. We want to bring all our training, all our hiking to a peak just before you go, so you'll challenge the body in the most best way possible. Now, one thing on top of this is because because you're pushing the body quite hard here, and because in any type of hike there are so many things that can go wrong, we want to have a bit of a buffer here in the sense that a lot of people you'll hike, all the training may have been going perfectly, and then your last hike you'll step in a pothole and roll your ankle, or you'll have a gear malfunction and hurt yourself, or you'll have a crazy wet weather and slip over, or just something will go wrong. And a lot of people in this last hike, because they're pushing their fitness to the limit, plus all the regular risks of things going wrong on the hike, sometimes they will get themselves in trouble. They'll pull up with an ache or pain, or sort of something will come up, whatever it may be. If this happens immediately before you go, the 1 week before you go, this can be super stressful. You can be like, oh my gosh, this is a trip ender. Oh my gosh, this last week, my knee is so sore. Oh my gosh, my ankle's like, all swollen up, or whatever it may be. And we don't want that. If you do this last most difficult hike 2 weeks before you go, even if something goes wrong, 2 weeks is typically enough time for the body to get over most things. If you do fall down the mountain and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm super bruised and battered, after 2 weeks, you're probably going to be closer to baseline. So essentially, this can give you a buffer if things do go wrong. And then finally, energy. Realistically, by the end of any training journey, whether you are you've been training for a month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or whatever it may be, by the end of any training journey, usually we're fighting a bit of a battle between energy and fatigue. We're like, oh my gosh, I've done all this training, my body's tired. Oh my gosh, I've done all this training, my body's sore. I'm really on this limit between just doing too much or whatever it may be. And by the end of the training journey, it's totally normal for you just to be a bit knackered. And we're just finding that balance here. And realistically, if you're in the situation where you train all the way up to your trip, we run the risk of entering your trip just feeling fatigued, just feeling low energy, just feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm just not myself. And we don't want that, because this trip we're training for a reason. More than likely, this hike means something to you. More than likely, you want this hike to be enjoyable. So we want to make sure we're entering the trip energized. And essentially just having these 2 weeks in between will allow time for your body to, as we said, recover and adapt, and also just get that energy back to normal. Ideally, we want to be at that stage where by the time you leave for your trip, you're kind of have that nervous energy. You've got that excitement. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to roll. And you hit that first day feeling like, yeah, I'm ready to go. As opposed to you hit that first day and you're like, oh, I'm tired already. We don't want that. So when it comes down to it, when we are looking at the last hike before an adventure, that's typically what I say. 2 weeks before you go, finish off your last one. If you did want to do another hike in the last weekend before you head off, do something easy, do something gentle. Go out for an hour, just cruise along, just have it really, really casual. Think recovery and casual as opposed to a hard training session. But that's my thoughts there. So, with that being said, as I said, this one is going to be a bit of a shorter one today. And I have a sick wife in the other room, and I want to go make sure she's all right. So, I'll probably wrap things up there. So yeah, for anyone who is watching this in the future, if you did have any follow-up questions of any of the stuff I just covered, feel free to let me know whatever it may be. If anyone does have any questions they'd like me to cover in future streams, again, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to put it on the list and cover things. But aside from that, for anyone watching this, hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you got a little bit out of it. Hope everyone has a lovely weekend, and we'll talk to you all very, very soon. Bye.